So, if you were a female singer performing on national television back in, say, 1957, the rules of engagement were just incredibly strict.
Oh, absolutely. Very, very rigid.
Right. Like, you stood perfectly still behind the microphone. You wore this very modest, probably pastel dress. And you sang with this quiet, polite, angelic voice, really.
Yeah, a voice that made everyone in the audience feel, very safe, very comfortable.
Exactly. Safe. So I want you to imagine the absolute shockwaves sent through all those conservative living rooms when a 20-year-old woman steps up to the microphone, covered head to toe in flashy fringe, and just unleashes this violent, gravelly scream.
I mean, it was wild.
A scream that could honestly rival any male rock star on the planet.
It was culturally destabilizing, to put it mildly.
Yeah.
Because at that time, we were looking at the very birth of rock and roll, right? This massive youth explosion.
Right, where you have traditional Southern country and rhythm and blues from Black communities and deeply rooted gospel all sort of violently colliding.
Exactly. But that new, thrilling space was almost exclusively a boys' club.
Totally.
The men got to sweat, they got to thrash their guitars, scream, whip the crowds into a total frenzy.
And the women.
Well, women were still expected to project, innocence, quiet grace.
Okay, let's unpack this, because our mission for today's deep dive is to really explore the life of the woman who looked at that boys' club, totally kicked the door off its hinges, and claimed the stage for herself.
The undisputed queen of rockabilly.
Yes, Wanda Jackson. And to really understand how radical it was for her to just scream into a microphone, you have to realize that she was practically raised to do the exact opposite.
Yeah, that is the fascinating paradox of her early life, I think.
Right.
She didn't just parachute into the music industry as this, seasoned, rebellious punk.
No, not at all.
She was born in Maud, Oklahoma, back in 1937, and she was a quintessential product of the traditional country music machine.
Her father loved country music, right?
He did. And as her family moved from Oklahoma to California and back again, she was just constantly soaking up the sounds of the radio.
Which was huge back then.
Oh, massive.
Yeah.
We really need to frame what radio meant in the early 1950s. It wasn't just like background noise for your commute.
Yeah.
It was the ultimate centralized star-making apparatus in America.
And she played that machine perfectly. I mean, she starts out as this local high school radio star, singing very sweet, very traditional country and Western ballads.
Doing everything by the book.
Everything. And the industry totally rewards her for it. By 1954, she lands a major professional contract with Decca Records.
Which is huge for a teenager.
Huge. And at that moment, they are packaging and marketing her entirely as the pure, sweet country girl next door.
Right.
She is on this very safe, incredibly predictable glide path to a respectable career in Southern country music.
But then she goes on a Southern tour.
Right.
And she happens to share the bill with a young, relatively unknown guy who is just starting to make some noise on the regional circuit.
A guy by the name of Elvis Presley.
Exactly, Elvis. And they end up spending a lot of time together between shows.
As you do on tour.
Right. And Elvis takes a look at her act and gives her a piece of advice that literally alters the course of music history.
Wow.
He explicitly tells her she needs to stop singing traditional country and pivot entirely to this brand new, aggressive sound called rock and roll.
See, I'm struggling to see the bridge here.
How so?
Well, if she is making her name singing sweet, traditional country ballads, how on earth did Elvis hear a rock and roll rebel in that?
It's a great question.
Was he just blindly guessing, or was there something like leaking through in her country tracks that gave it away? Because to me, this is like taking a classically trained violinist succeeding in a prestigious symphony, and a buddy tells them to drop the violin, pick up a distorted electric guitar, and join a heavy metal band.
That is a perfect analogy.
Why did Elvis think she could actually pull this off?
Well, what's fascinating here is that Elvis wasn't guessing at all. He was listening to the underlying mechanics of her voice.
Okay, the mechanics.
Yeah. If you analyze the vocal profile of the typical female country singer of that specific era, they sang predominantly in their head voice.
Like that lighter, higher register.
Exactly. It was light, airy, melodic. It was designed to float over acoustic instruments.
Right.
But Wanda naturally possessed a heavy, low, and incredibly punchy chest voice.
So she actually had physical power behind the notes.
Immense power. And, in early rock and roll, power was a mechanical necessity.
Because of the instruments.
Right. When you were suddenly singing over loud, distorted electric guitars and aggressive driving drum beats, a delicate, airy voice just gets completely drowned out.
It just vanishes.
Totally. You need a vocal tone that acts almost like a percussive instrument itself just to cut through all that noise.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
And furthermore, she had an incredibly strong innate sense of rhythm,
Which you need for rockabilly.
absolutely essential for that syncopation.
Yeah.
So Elvis heard that heavy vocal weight and that driving rhythm, and he realized she already had the engine of a rock star.
She just needed to steer it onto a different track.
Exactly.
And the crazy part is she actually takes the advice.
She does.
She takes that acoustic guitar, plugs it into the amp, so to speak, and the result is explosive. Like in 1957, she releases a track called Fujiyama Mama.
Oh, what a track.
And this is not some gentle transition. It is a blistering, high-speed rockabilly anthem.
It really is.
This is the exact moment she introduces what becomes her absolute signature sound to the world. She brings out this rough, undeniable vocal growl and these wild, aggressive shouts.
We really need to look at what she's doing physically with her vocal cords there, because it's important.
Yeah, let's get into that.
She isn't just singing the lyrics, she is actively straining and distorting her voice on purpose to create grit.
Right, which is tough to do.
Very. It's an aggressive vocal technique that male blues and rock singers were using to convey raw emotion.
Right, the guys were doing it.
But to hear a woman in 1957 intentionally rough up her vocal cords to literally roar at an audience,
Unheard of.
it completely shattered the established image of female performative restraint.
And the global reaction to that roar is wild. Fujiyama Mama becomes a massive international hit. But most notably, it goes to #1 in Japan.
Which is incredible.
It's wild when you look at the actual lyrics to that song, though. She is literally using Mount Fuji and the atomic bomb as a metaphor for her own explosive energy.
Yeah, that imagery.
Obviously, using atomic imagery so soon after World War II is going to be highly controversial,
Yeah.
and it sparked a lot of debate in later historical reviews.
Oh, certainly.
But from a purely musical standpoint, in 1957, she was using that imagery strictly as an extreme metaphor to tell the audience, basically, I am an unstoppable force.
The Japanese reception is such a phenomenal piece of cultural history, honestly.
Hmm.
Despite the incredibly sensitive lyrics, American rockabilly was becoming a massive cultural import in post-war Japan.
Okay.
The youth culture there was desperate for the raw, visceral energy that rock provided. So when Wanda toured Japan, the crowds didn't really focus on the literal translation of the atomic lyrics.
They just felt the vibe.
Exactly. They locked on to the pure, unbridled power of her delivery. They embraced the song because the sheer intensity of her performance transcended the language barrier entirely.
And that momentum really kicks off a legendary string of late 50s rockabilly hits for her.
Oh, yeah.
We are talking about absolute barn burners, songs like Mean, Mean Man, Let's Have a Party, and Hard-Headed Woman.
Just classics.
She is holding her own, out-rocking most of the men on the charts. But this is where I find myself wondering about the visual element of her performances.
Okay.
To compete and be taken seriously in this incredibly aggressive, male-dominated space, does she feel the need to visually assimilate?
Like act like one of the guys.
Yeah. Did she have to dress down, maybe put on a leather jacket or hide her femininity to command that kind of masculine stage power?
Well, that is the assumption you might make, given how society operated back then. But she subverted that completely.
Really?
Yeah, Wanda redefined the visual aesthetic of the female rocker by literally weaponizing her glamour.
Weaponizing her glamour. I love that.
She absolutely refused to compromise her femininity. Instead of wearing men's suits to look tough, she actually designed her own stage outfits.
Oh, wow.
And there were brilliant pieces of performance engineering. She wore high heels, heavy makeup, and most famously, these tightly fitted dresses covered in long silk fringe.
Oh, I've seen footage of those fringe dresses, and they seem almost strategic.
They were highly strategic.
Mm-hmm.
The fringe wasn't just for decoration. It was designed to amplify movement.
Oh, I see.
Think about it.
Mm-hmm.
When male rockers like Elvis or Jerry Lee Lewis performed, they used their entire bodies. They were shaking, jumping, kicking the piano stool over.
Right, getting real physical.
But Wanda was playing the guitar, so she couldn't run around the stage in quite the same way.
That makes sense.
But when she shimmied or moved her hips in those fringe dresses, the fabric swung violently.
Right.
It created this massive visual spectacle of kinetic energy. So she maintained all the traditional markers of 1950s female glamour while simultaneously projecting the commanding, aggressive strength of rock.
She proved you could look flawlessly put together and still tear the roof off a venue with a vocal growl.
Exactly.
But, you cannot blow up societal norms like that without taking some heavy shrapnel.
No, definitely not.
Pioneers are usually the ones who catch the arrows. And Wanda faced some intense industry pushback for refusing to tone it down.
The broader conservative culture of the 1950s, and specifically the gatekeepers of the music industry, they were simply not equipped to digest a woman expressing that level of visceral emotion and dominance.
They didn't know what to do with her.
Not at all. Industry executives very quickly labeled her as hard to handle.
Which, if we translate 1950s industry jargon, is usually code for a woman who knows exactly what she wants, controls her own art, and isn't afraid to demand it.
Spot on. And that label brought severe structural consequences for her career.
Like what?
Well, television networks actively restricted her appearances. And when they did book her, they heavily policed her act.
Really?
Yeah, they would demand she change her outfits to something more conservative. Sometimes directors would deliberately frame the camera strictly from the waist up to hide her movements.
Just like they did with Elvis.
Much like Elvis, yes, but with a much more punitive underlying judgment. The networks deemed her live performances too extreme, too aggressive, and frankly, too openly sexual for conservative America.
So there was a real double standard.
A huge one. Male rockers were viewed as dangerous but marketable. A female rocker was viewed as a genuine threat to the social order.
And as if fighting the cultural gatekeepers wasn't enough, she also had to fight the changing tides of the music industry itself.
Music moves fast.
It does. As we roll into the 1960s, the entire landscape undergoes this massive tectonic shift. You have the British invasion led by the Beatles crashing onto American shores, and it effectively decimates the 1950s rockabilly boom.
Yeah, the demand for that specific style of American rockabilly plummeted almost overnight.
Just wiped it out.
The industry moved on to pop rock, psychedelic sounds, and heavily produced studio albums.
So she has to pivot yet again just to survive in the industry. Wanda makes a very strategic move back to country music and the Nashville scene, looking for some commercial stability.
Which is smart.
Very smart. But what I love about this era is that she doesn't retreat. She doesn't go back to being the quiet, acoustic sweetheart she was in 1954.
Right?
She brings that rock-infused vocal power right with her into the country studios.
It definitely does.
And then, as we move into the 1970s, she experiences a profound personal shift. She deepens her religious faith, steps completely away from the secular club and rock lifestyle, and dedicates her career almost entirely to gospel music.
It is a massive environmental transition.
For sure.
Going from smoky, rowdy rock venues to church gatherings and religious recording sessions.
So what does this all mean? When we track her jumping from traditional country to blazing rockabilly, back to Nashville country, and then landing in gospel,
Yeah.
did she lose her edge? Did she just become this chameleon who morphed into whatever the market or her personal circumstances dictated?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the answer is an emphatic no.
Okay.
What makes Wanda Jackson's discography so remarkable is that her core artistic identity never wavered.
Interesting.
Whether she was singing a high-speed rock song about an atomic bomb, or a weeping Nashville country ballad, or a deeply spiritual gospel hymn.
Yeah.
The raw emotional power and that incredible heavy vocal strength she forged in the 1950s, it remained perfectly intact.
So the vessel she was pouring her talent into changed, but the water inside remained exactly the same.
That is a perfect way to look at it. She proved that true vocal conviction transcends genre boundaries.
Because emotion is universal.
Exactly. The emotional persuasion of a voice is universal. Her ability to survive those rapidly shifting musical eras wasn't about compromising her edge. It was about demonstrating how versatile that edge could be when applied to entirely new challenges.
I love that.
She didn't assimilate into country or gospel. She forced country and gospel to accommodate her power.
And because she had the resilience to survive those decades, she left to see the ultimate historical vindication.
Which is the best part of the story.
It really is. The musical eras kept turning, and eventually, history caught back up to the foundation she had built. In the late 1970s and 1980s, you start seeing this massive rockabilly and roots revival.
We're at the punk era.
Yes, a whole new generation of punk and garage rock bands are looking backward, searching for the raw roots of rebellion, and they discover Wanda Jackson's early records.
And this is the moment where her public perception undergoes a permanent, massive correction.
Because before, they didn't really get her.
Right. During the 50s and 60s, a lot of mainstream critics viewed her as a novelty act.
Wow.
The novelty being, oh, look at a woman attempting to do a man's job in rock music.
Typical.
But when the punk rockers of the 1980s found her, they operated with a totally different value system. Punk values raw authenticity, grit, and attitude over polished technique.
They don't care about the rules.
Exactly. They listened to Let's Have a Party,
Hmm.
and they didn't see a novelty. They recognized her as a genuine, authentic rock pioneer who was doing punk rock decades before the genre even had a name.
She was the real deal. And that newfound respect just snowballed. By the 2000s, younger generations of musicians are collaborating with her, covering her songs, and openly revering her as the mother of rock.
It's beautiful to see.
And all of this historical reassessment finally culminates in the ultimate climax of her career, which is her 2011 induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
That induction was a watershed moment, not just as a capstone for her personal career, but really for the broader historical narrative of music itself.
Here's where it gets really interesting. When you analyze that Hall of Fame induction, you start to trace the direct lineage of her influence.
You really do.
She didn't just participate in early rock, she laid the actual physical blueprint for the female rockers who followed.
The whole foundation.
You know, you do not get the screaming, uninhibited blues rock of Janis Joplin. You do not get the leather-clad aggression of Joan Jett. And you certainly do not get the entire riot girl punk movement of the 90s without Wanda Jackson kicking the door open first.
Her Hall of Fame induction formally cemented a truth that had been overlooked for half a century.
Which is?
That a woman was standing right there at ground zero of rock and roll.
Yeah.
The history of early rock is so aggressively written from the male perspective. You know, Elvis, Chuck Berry, Little Richard.
Always the guys.
But her induction demanded that the history books be rewritten to include the fact that a woman proved definitively that females could scream, they could be fiercely aggressive, and they could completely dominate an audience.
It pulls all the threads of this deep dive together for you. Wanda Jackson's story isn't just some neat piece of mid-century music trivia to bring up at a party.
No, it's much bigger than that.
It is an absolute masterclass in defying the arbitrary boxes that society tries to force you into. Whether it was the box of the pure country sweetheart or the stifling box of the submissive 1950s woman, she destroyed the fixed idea of how women should behave.
Completely.
And she didn't do it with some calculated, written political manifesto. She did it simply by being relentlessly, authentically, and loudly herself.
She took her natural gifts, amplified them with absolute fearlessness, and refused to turn her volume down just because people running the room felt uncomfortable.
Which leaves us with a thought I really want you to mull over long after you finish listening today. Wanda Jackson kicked down doors in her 20s, but she had to wait until she was in her 70s to be formally recognized by the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for her pioneering work.
It took a long time.
It really did. And it makes you wonder if a single conversation with a peer, like Wanda's chat with a young Elvis, could unlock a totally new, unapologetic version of herself that changed history.
Yeah.
Who is the Elvis in your life right now pushing you to break your own mold? And more importantly, are you brave enough to listen to them?
That is a great question. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the extraordinary life of the Queen of Rockabilly.
Yeah.
Keep exploring the history behind the music, and keep questioning the boxes you find yourself in.
We appreciate you taking this journey with us. Until next time, keep diving deep.